So as I was preparing for today, I sometimes get on the internet and Google things. So I Googled Prince of Peace. And what came up when I Googled Prince of Peace was this picture. And what's interesting about this picture is the painter who painted it was a child of atheists and never taught any religious training. And what's interesting about this picture is she was 9 when she painted it. And it kind of floored me because she started having visions of God and Jesus when she was 4. And consequently and subsequently, her parents have now converted to Christianity because of the mission, the missionary aspect of their 4, now she's 15-year-old daughter. Her name is Akiana. You can look her up. She's been on Oprah, she's been on CNN. Nobody can understand how she's learned to paint the way she's learned to paint. But she's painting like a master painter, and she's barely 15. So, but there's also something interesting because he's clearly Caucasian. He's got green eyes. He's not Middle Eastern. If it was really the Aramaic Jesus, he would look. So it's clearly that she has a filter on what her version of Jesus would look like. So, but it's fascinating that something is happening in her consciousness that is tapping into something that isn't ordinary. I have a couple stories to tell you. First story is my trip home this Thanksgiving. So it's actually a trip back to California because sometimes when if your parents are living and you say I'm going home for the holidays, usually mean your parents' home, which is where I went for Thanksgiving. I went to my parents' home for Thanksgiving. And my father had to be rushed to the hospital on Monday before Thanksgiving with what we thought was a stroke, because half of his face turned off. And it turned out he had Lyme disease for 2 weeks, which is so much better than a stroke because you can treat Lyme disease with antibiotics. But he's over there, and I say, "Smile for me, Dad." And he goes, looks like the Joker from Batman, right? So, needless to say, the week for Thanksgiving was challenging, with my dad being in the hospital and negotiating him, and my mother's mostly bedridden, so I became my mother's caregiver for the week while he was in the hospital. So I was happy to see my parents. I was also tired when I was done. So I was looking forward to coming back to California. And I had a connecting flight in Chicago. Boy, there's a lot of opinions about Chicago.
Hey, we're from Chicago, come on. Sleeping on the airport floor. Yeah.
I had a connection in Chicago and only had a few hour wait. And just about 20 minutes before we boarded, I was standing, waiting at Southwest so you'd line up, right? So I was standing before the line, over by the chairs. And this 20-something young man, about 6'3", came over and he noticed my ukulele case. But it's a baritone ukulele, so it surprises a lot of people. Not everybody knows what this is. So he asked me if it was a mandolin. I said, no, it's a ukulele. Now, our young visitor had the typical sides shaved of his head that are indicator that he's in the Marines. I don't want to spend my holiday speaking to a Marine. I'm processing the stuff that's gone on with my parents, and I live in California, and anti the war, so it's like I don't want to be speaking to a jarhead. I play guitar too, he says. Oh, great, we're having a conversation now, aren't we? So we chat a little bit. He goes, "What ticket number are you?" I say, B24. He says, B25. I guess we'll be talking a lot. Joy. Rejoice. So we get on the plane and he sits across the aisle from me. And we're talking and I'm being polite and I know that I want to sleep at some point, but I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to be polite with him and have a conversation. At some point, I don't know where this came from, but what came out of my mouth was, well, I don't think the average citizen should own a handgun. Well, I feel a little naked if I don't have two sidearms on one on each side. I'm going to teach my daughters how to shoot, make sure they know how to handle a gun. It's like, wow, how did I get in this one? And how do I get out? So the woman sitting next to me, the kid behind her is kicking her chair, so she decides she's going to move. So she gets up and moves. Marine volunteers his seat.
Oh, no.
John, move over. John moves over. So now Sergeant Will is on the aisle, and I'm in the, no, not in the middle, I'm now on the window. There's I got a little buffer, but he's now in control of the aisle. So we continue to talk, and I realized at some point that this was unescapable, and I'm actually going to bridge the gap a little bit by talking about the ukulele, because he plays guitar, right? So I get the ukulele down, and he says, I'm going to just teach him a chord. I'm going to teach him a chord, and then I'm going to go to sleep. That's my goal, right? I'm going to go to sleep. So he goes, what's your favorite cover song? And I said, I don't have one, I've got a lot, because I have a lot of songs on my iPad. So I break out my iPad. And he picks the ukulele up like a duck to water. And he goes, on a dark desert highway, cool wind in my head, warm smell of colitas rising up through the air. All of a sudden I'm singing along with him. It was like I could, you're playing my ukulele and you're singing, I'm going to sing along. 2 hours we sang. 2 hours we sang. We sang every single song in my songbook, every song he could figure out to sing. And then I slept. And then we landed. And then I was sad to see him go. And he asked me for my number. He's a straight Marine from Sonoma County going home for the holidays with 3 kids, and he wanted to stay in touch with me. And it was the most amazing flight I'd ever been on. But he would not be somebody I would have gone up and said namaste to. Not. And what I saw for myself in that whole story was how I predict how somebody's going to be, and I'm already thinking to myself, I can't see the Christ in them. Only that's what we preach, right?
Right.
So what the lesson for me was, the profound lesson for me was, be open to seeing the Christ anywhere it shows up.
That was your seed, Lord. Yeah, that was like your seed.
Simply experiencing everyone's divinity. That's right. So, the next story. My cousin Karen is 1 year younger than me. We grew up in the same town, and we went to the same high school, so she's more like a sister than a cousin. She's in the process of divorcing her husband. He lives in the basement of their house, and they're not getting along. She has twin 10-year-olds. And the boy, it's a fraternal twins, boy and a girl, and the boy has a little bit of hyperactivity. So she says to me, John, my life is a prison. Now, I'm in New Thought, and we understand the power of our words. And she's not in New Thought, she's in the traditional world. But I found a way to weave into the conversation. Karen, I can't begin to understand your circumstances because I've never been in those circumstances. But I do know that the way I talk about my life reinforces my life. She goes, oh, I totally believe that. All right, she's open. Well, what you just said was my life is a prison. She goes, yeah, I know. It was almost like she was confessing that she knows that she reinforces it. There was a moment where she got it. So I said, let's just find something else that you can say that is counter to my life as a prison. She kind of grumbled. And so we talked for a little bit more. We came up with, in the midst of this, I find peace and freedom. In the midst of this, I find peace and freedom. Say that with me. In the midst of this, I find peace and freedom. She goes, yeah, I'll try it. She works at Trader Joe's. Guy comes into the store 3 days before Thanksgiving, looking for fresh turkey. They're gone. He starts giving her attitude. And she's thinking to herself, peace and freedom. And she actually said it made a difference. They actually saw that her attitude shifted. And she was able to find her peace and freedom. Now, can she go from 0 to being a master at that right away? No, what does she have to do?
Practice.
Practice, that's right. And one of the ways you practice is you share it with others. So she calls me up and she goes, you know, I've been telling my friend Jennifer about this. Wow. What does she say? She goes, well, she's got triplets and another one, so she's got 4. But we've been trying it, and it actually is interesting. So what she's doing in her practice is she's found a practice buddy to say it. This is all inside of the family story. So my other cousin, Michelle is not totally deaf, but she's profoundly deaf. She's got about 30% hearing, so that's considered legally deaf. So I'm at Michelle's, hanging out with her, and we are doing in the midst of this, in the middle, and she likes the word, this is the word for grief. In the midst of this grief, you see you're wrenching your heart. See that? You're like, in the midst of grief, I find, like you're picking something out of a basket, I find peace and freedom. So now Michelle, I've infected Michelle as well as Karen. I have a sister-in-law who's Greek. We've got 5 languages that are spoken in my immediate family. Sister-in-law is Greek, stemasi oronton programaton vrisko irini ka elthiria. This is the sister-in-law that I've never quite gotten along with, and we had the best Thanksgiving ever. And she was laughing through the whole thing. She goes, oh, this is beautiful. Bravo. Bravo. The Greeks like to say, bravo. Bravo, John. My aunt is from Spain, so en medio de esto, encontrar la paz y la libertad. Correct?
Encuentro.
They say good?
Encuentro.
Which one?
It's either encuentro. I encountered.
We're going to go with what I said.
You asked, so
It's good to be able to be corrected in public and not be defaced, you know? Thank you, Nancy. Here's the other thing I want to say about Michelle, my cousin who's deaf. So when I was hanging out with her, she was humming a song, and I was trying to figure out, because I didn't think she could actually do music, because her hearing loss was so profound. She's humming a song, and I go,
Beethoven.
yeah, but he did it after he was deaf. She's been deaf since birth. So I didn't know that she had any musical ability, I just thought she didn't. So, let me see if you can hear this. I accidentally played this, which wasn't what I meant to play. I played that little, can you hear that?
yeah.
Like that. And she goes, oh, that's Aretha. I said, what? She goes, that's Aretha Franklin. I said, you're kidding me. She goes, no. first 3 notes were the exact notes from the Aretha Franklin song. That means that my deaf cousin has perfect pitch.
Wow.
It's not only just interesting, like theoretically, but I mean, just the perception of me being willing to be open to somebody's healing that's larger than mine, that's larger than my perspective. If I consider myself in a healing role and I limit myself to what I think that they can be healed, that's the deaf can sing. So I have a poem to read for you. You may have heard this before sung, because it's a song, but I'm actually just doing a reading of the song. In an old city bar that's never too far from the places that gather the dreams that have been, in the safety of night with its old neon light, it beckons to strangers, and they always come in. In the snow it was falling, the neon was calling, the music was low in the bar Christmas Eve. Here was the danger, that even with strangers, inside of this night, it's so easy to believe. Then the door opened wide, and a child came inside. No one in the bar had seen her before, and he asked, did we know that outside in the snow someone was lost, standing outside our door? Then the bartender gazed through the smoke and the haze, through the window and ice to the corner street light, where standing alone by a broken payphone was a girl, the child said, who could not get back home. In the snow it was falling, the neon was calling, the bartender turned and said, not that I care, but how would you know this? And the child said, I've noticed, if one could be home, it'd already be there. Then the bartender came out from the back of the bar, and in all of his life, never traveled that far. And he did something else he thought no one else saw. He took all of the cash from his register drawer. Then he followed the child to the girl across the street, and we watched from the bar as they started to speak. Then he called for a cab, and he said, JFK. And he put the girl in the cab, and the cab drove away. And we saw in his hand that the cash was all gone from the light that the little lost child wished upon. If you want to arrange it, this world, you can change it. If we could somehow make this Christmas thing last, by helping a neighbor, or even a stranger, to know who needs help. You just have to ask. Then the bartender looked for the child, but the child wasn't there. Just the wind and the snow, waltzing dreams through the air. So we walked back inside, somehow different, I think. For the rest of the night, no one paid for a drink. And the cynics will say that some neighborhood kid wandered in on some bums in the bar where they hid. But they weren't there, so they couldn't know, and they couldn't see by an old neon star on that night, Christmas Eve. When the snow, it was falling, and the neon was calling, in case you should wonder, in case you should care, why we on our own never went home on that night of all nights. We were already there. This is from the Child Prodigy. The day I was born, I met myself. The day I was born, I met my young mother. The day I was born, I met the Christ sleeping in my cradle. Where's the Prince of Peace? Where's the Prince of Peace? When is the Prince of Peace?
Always.
And